because this wasn't Sparky.
If you've been around the FNAF fandom as long as I have, or maybe even longer, you've seen your fair share of hoaxes hit the community over the years. We definitely don't see as many nowadays, with the last believable ones popping up around Security Breach, but FNAF's classic era did lend to creating some of the most iconic hoaxes in the series. Some of these include Nightmare JJ, Shadow Balloon Boy, Chrome Freddy, and even the Purple Guy animatronic, though none are more iconic than FNAF's very first hoax. Sparky the Dog is not just FNAF's most iconic hoax, but perhaps one of the most iconic hoaxes in all of gaming, having a place on pretty much every gaming hoaxes and urban legends iceberg on YouTube, and that itself is pretty crazy considering the actual history of Sparky the Dog. The Sparky the Dog hoax was started on August 18th, 2014, only 10 days after the release of the first Five Nights at Freddy's, when Tumblr user CodyAbear, formerly Birdnames, made a post admiring the design of an animatronic who they say was apparently pretty hard to unlock with barely any info known about them. Here they showed off a sketch of this mysterious dog animatronic, with yellow spots, blue overalls, one lit eye, and a seemingly broken arm with sparks coming from its exposed wires. They'd also start seeding more info and artwork in their next few posts, still unable to find any more info or even get screenshots of him during their playthrough, but claiming they'd seen him around the backstage and nowhere else. 3 days later, on August 21st, to add on to the Sparky hoax, CodyAbear's friend would post what appeared to be a screen cap from a FNAF video on YouTube of none other than Sparky the Dog peeking into the backstage just as they'd been describing. CodyAbear would respond to this, confirming that that's who they'd been seemingly seeing and had done their sketches of. Looking back, it is ironic that CodyAbear would put so much detail into their sketch of this FNAF character, who, now seeing the supposed screenshot, is pretty much barely visible, with basically only Sparky's broken arm still showing through the camera static thanks to its sparks. Oh, get it? Sparky? Yeah, that really shouldn't have taken me that long. Now, obviously, we know now that this wasn't real, but at the time, it seemed to work as a pretty convincing hoax. Like I said, this hoax dropped nearly 10 days after the release of a currently obscure indie game from an unheard of developer. And with basically no established fandom or even knowledge of how to decompile games like we have now, it's pretty clear why it did so well. According to a post made by CodyAbear's friend who made the iconic Sparky Hoax image, it was apparently so convincing that people kept begging others who knew how to dig through the files to look for him, and even had users going back and forth adding and removing Sparky from various wikis. That's why CodyAbear's friend made this post in the first place, about a month after the initial hoax went live, dispelling the hoax to ease tensions despite both them and CodyAbear wanting to leave the whole thing open-ended, but ultimately having to come clean about it. In this post, they even did a breakdown of how the iconic Sparky Hoax image was made, being a quick paint job overlaid onto an empty shot of the backstage with all the camera UI and static overlaid to really seal the deal and make it look convincing. While Sparky's first official design does technically come from the art CodyAbear posted before the hoax image went live, since that image itself has become so much more of a large icon for the hoax, it's instead what most people base their designs for Sparky on. Like with this model by UFMP that's been used in pretty much every FNAF hoax thumbnail at this point. Now ultimately, that's about where the original hoax died off. Many iconic FNAF hoaxes would follow, and Sparky would still remain at the top as most memorable, but his run was mostly contained to the first Five Nights at Freddy's. Meanwhile though, the series itself kept growing, certainly larger than either Scott or CodyAbear could have expected, and that means Sparky wouldn't be FNAF's only dog animatronic for long. At this point, FNAF's introduced quite a few of its own dog-themed animatronics, from the iconic to more obscure, starting all the way back in the Silver Eyes where Henry Emily, co-founder of Fazbear Entertainment with William Afton, made his daughter Charlie a little animatronic dog toy that would tilt its head side to side. Later, after her death and the construction of a fake pizzeria set underneath his house where he used illusion technology to record fake memories for a robot recreation of her, which yes, does somehow all happen basically in the span of one book, there also happens to be FNAF's second ever dog animatronic. Among other randomly inserted animals in this underground pizzeria was a black dog with red eyes, who appears to be unfinished, only seen as its head on a rack for what could have eventually been a full costume. Now, while those guys were definitely more obscure one-offs, the most known dog animatronic since Sparky was undoubtedly Fetch, who most figured was almost certainly a Sparky reference himself when he first debuted. As opposed to the dog animatronics of the novel trilogy releasing between 2015 and 2018, Fazbear Frights No. 2 would release in 2020, revealing Fetch, an animatronic dog from the book's cover story of the same name, who a group of teens discover at the prize counter of an abandoned Freddy Fazbear's Pizza decades after the murders that killed the franchise. Fetch itself, however, unlike Sparky, was not a full-size animatronic, instead smaller and on on all fours like a real dog rather than like most of the anthropomorphic animatronics in the series. Fetch, despite being found at a long-abandoned Freddy's, is actually a modern product of Fazbear Entertainment from some point in the 2010s, having been placed there seemingly by Eleanor to cause some of the chaos we see in the story. What's so special about Fetch is that it's actually possessed by William Afton and the spirit of a boy named Andrew, aka one of William's most important victims, the one you shouldn't have killed. As you can probably tell, Fetch on his own has quite a bit of story to him, which you can look forward to seeing expanded on in a full-fledged Fetch game by Megacat Studios, serving as a follow-up to the Into the Pit game they brought us for FNAF's 10-year anniversary. Now, it's clear that after nearly 10 years of Five Nights at Freddy's, the series has expanded enough to develop its own obscure and iconic dog animatronics, but that doesn't mean FNAF was done with old Sparky. Enter the FNAF Movie, pretty much a testament to the very first Five Nights at Freddy's game. And what's a remake of FNAF 1 without a reference to its most beloved hoax? Scott made sure to jam-pack the FNAF movie full of Easter eggs and references only the truest of FNAF fans would pick up on, and one of those was the inclusion of Sparky's Diner. Sparky's Diner, established 1963, is a diner somewhere in Granite Falls, Minnesota, where we first see Jeff and Max getting hassled by Aunt Jane over not being able to find any dirt on Mike. This scene was definitely one of the most memorable for general audiences between the appearance of MatPat as a waiter and the hilarity that is Doug looking like he's 3 seconds away from a heart attack, but this scene somehow becomes even more insane if you read, yes, you guessed it, a FNAF book. Specifically, the FNAF movie novelization, which drops the insane lore on us that not only was Sparky's Diner founded by a guy actually named Sparky, but he happens to be the father of none other than Ness himself working as a waiter at his dad's own shop, meaning it's confirmed that Sparky the Dog is MatPat's dad. Okay, maybe not exactly, but you can definitely see it's crazy all that was saved for the novelization. Now, even though that's all for Sparky's Diner as a reference, that wasn't the only Sparky reference the FNAF movie seemed to have. Let's skip ahead to the aftermath of the Sparky's Diner scene where Jeff and his gang have agreed to go rough up Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in hopes of getting Mike fired. After he leaves the place unlocked following his second shift, the crew breaks in and tosses the place around before being picked off one by one by each of the animatronics. The last of these kills is Max, who we see being lured by the spirit inside Freddy to the parts and service room. Before she makes it over to Freddy though, we get a glimpse of 3 suits sitting against the wall. One being the Torture Freddy suit, one being Shadow Freddy, and the one in the middle being an unfamiliar dog costume. Later on Mike's 5th night, after narrowly escaping the torture chair, he ends up accidentally bumping into these same suits. Now with Max stuffed into the Shadow Freddy suit and Uncle Hank hidden away in this mysterious dog costume. This is something Christian Stokes, actor of Uncle Hank, actually tweeted about, where he said, "Don't count old Hank out just yet," in reference to Hank getting stuffed into Sparky, asking fans if they'd want to see Hank back as Sparky in future movies. Interestingly, it seems like the only reason Christian Stokes even knew Sparky's name is thanks to Carl's actor Joseph Poliquin, who was a FNAF fan long before getting cast in the movie, and would have definitely been aware of the Sparky hoax going into filming. So while Christian Stokes or Joseph Poliquin calling him Sparky isn't technically official, they definitely got their knowledge about the reference correct. And thankfully, it seems not just Sparky's Diner, but this suit itself landed as a Sparky reference to the FNAF fandom. So much so that even Kodiabear, the original creator of Sparky, became aware of the reference nearly 10 years after his creation. Kodiabear, now Xalts on Reddit, has made a few posts in the last 4 years showing off their own art and designs of Sparky, and even commenting about how bizarre it is that a little joke they made 10 years ago has made it all the way to a feature film. So with this final tribute to the first Five Nights at Freddy's out after years of development, does that mean Sparky's saga is basically over? Well, yes and no. There is still more to Sparky, but ironically this final appearance actually completely changes how we thought Sparky's saga might have ended. And that's because this wasn't Sparky. Enter Secret of the Mimic, the newest Five Nights at Freddy's game from Stillwell Studios set at Murray's Costume Manor in 1979, where we face off against the Mimic donning various mascot costumes around the workshop. Off the top of fans' heads, they might remember specifically that Secret of the Mimic features 2 dog-themed costumes first teased in Tales from the Pizzaplex, being the Birthday Puppy and Shar-Pei Poodle costumes, each with their own set of various colors. Those, however, are not exactly the dog costume we're looking for in Murray's Costume Manor. Instead, we're headed deep underground to the MCM R&D department, where we find essentially a prototype Freddy Fazbear's Pizza previously being worked on for Fazbear Entertainment. It's clear since Edwin's disappearance that the animatronics he had worked on for Freddy's ultimately went unfinished, but it turns out these weren't the first animatronics made lead for the restaurant project. Located in a nearby office, we can find an audio log from Edwin going over a change request from Fazbear Entertainment, who were looking to go with a set of alternate designs, aka the classics, rather than whatever Edwin was nearly finished with at the time. Since we can see the classic designs Fazbear wanted out in the open but unfinished, it stands to reason whatever Edwin had nearly finished might still be hiding around here as well. And sure enough, but behind closed curtains around the place, we can find animatronics like Fredbear, Spring Bonnie, Spring Monty, and most importantly in this case, Spring Bub. No, that's not Bubba Bear, but instead Bub, a Springlock Dog animatronic designed by Fiona and built by Edwin, which was intended to be used at the very first Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, seemingly alongside Proto Fredbear, Proto Spring Bonnie, and Springlock Monty. If we take a look at Seeker the Mimic's good ending, we can also see very clearly that Fiona designed Bub, including her, yes, her, as a part of David's bedtime stories alongside Monty and the rest of the core four. Ultimately realizing that she was going to be a main part of Freddy's band surprisingly isn't the important part here, but instead that we saw Bub for the very first time not in Secret of the Mimic, but all the way back in the Five Nights at Freddy's movie. That's right, this suit wasn't Sparky, but instead Bub. If we take a look at some of Secret of the Mimic's concept art, we can see that early concepts for Bub matched suspiciously close to what we thought was Sparky in the movie. This conversely also ties into how FNAF fans have started to realize that Scott probably used the FNAF movie to hide quite a few references to Seeker the Mimic that we pretty much wouldn't have discovered for 2 years. Examples including this dispatch intercom found in the office, him naming an endoskeleton Arnold, and of course a suit of Bub laying in parts and service. Even the tiny scraps of marketing we have about this suit from the movie seem to point to it always having been more than just a simple Sparky animatronic. If we take a look at their U2's plushie, because yes, of all characters they did get a U2's plushie, you might notice they leave its name as just 3 question marks. Now obviously Scott can't go and actually name a plush Sparky since that might end up being legally dubious, but I think he actually knew that and made a pretty smart decision because of it. Bub is definitely a Sparky reference, but for practical reasons, Scott chose to make her her own character, going beyond just the FNAF movie and even making her a girl to try and be as original as he could be while still pulling off the reference. And that's why the 3 question marks on Bub's plush aren't actually just because U2s didn't know what to call this thing, but instead to temporarily cover up the 3 letters we'd eventually discover make up the name Bub. So now we have Bub, a female dog Springlock suit, serving as the successor and final send-off to what will always be FNAF's most iconic hoax.